Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023 week 15. That's April 10th to April 16th. And we are, surprise, surprise, doing some more wiring. But this video does have a little bit of excitement in the middle where I get super excited. I start to see some of the work actually come to life. So yeah, stick around and hopefully you join me in my excitement because I'm pumped on it. Alright, so what we're doing here is we are ending another cable, and we're going to run that in the car after. So as you can see, everything's a bit of a mess right now, but we are going to run this wire to the battery post, and that will feed all of the relays. That'll make it so that I can turn, the fuel pump or the fans or the water pump or whatever I want on while the ignition is off. But what I'm kind of figuring right now is I have all of these wires for the lights, for the fuel pump, fuel gauge. All of these need to be run to the back of the car. So at this point in time, I'm kind of thinking, well, why don't I take some time and we will clean these wires up and we'll run them to the back of the car with all the battery wires. So that's what we're going to do, clean up and run some wires. So I think I'm running this as a ground for the relay board, or at least into that general area, but I don't actually need that thick of a wire for the relay board ground, because it's the ground is literally just one side of the relays, so I could get away with a much smaller wire than that 4 gauge. So I'm not entirely sure what the plan is with that. I might just run that to the ground post that you saw me kind of trying to figure out where to place, and from there I would then just run a cable up to the relay module, but I'm not entirely sure. I guess I'll figure that out later, because I haven't even done that yet as of today, so I don't know what the plan is there yet. But I do know I need to run these wires to the back of the car. Man, this bundle is starting to look so good now. Like, when I look at the back of the car, there is still a pile of wires, but only on the driver's side. The passenger side looks super nice. I'm so happy with that. Yeah. I mean, the zip ties are temporary. Once I've tested the car, I'll pull the harness out, redo it all with just electrical tape and loom the entire harness. But for now, using zip ties is perfect. And now that I've got that bundle done, I need to run a chassis ground off the battery. So I'm just figuring out the best place to run that, and I'm going to run that just right kind of in front of the battery box. I'm going to put a fairly large hole. I think it's 2.5 inch, and then I'll put a grommet over top of the hole so that it's not just a big, gaping hole to the world. Yeah, so I'll drill that out, and then I'll run the cable down. So I'm just getting the shop vac out and just vacuuming up some of the mess from the hole saw. Kind of nice to just have it clean, especially if I'm going to be under the car. I don't really want any of that metal like falling down in my face. So just clean it up. So the game plan right now is I'm just going to drill a hole into the chassis, and then through that hole I will tap it out to 1/4 20, and that is how I'm going to install my chassis ground. I believe that the frame rail is thick enough that I shouldn't really need to add any material to it. And I should be able to get it tightened down, no problem. Yeah, so I'm just reading the tap and die instructions and figuring out the best drill bit to use. You don't want to go too big, otherwise then you got to size everything up. If you go too small, your tap might not start, and it might just be kind of a shitty time. So read the directions, get the right size drill bit, and away we go. This is a situation where I would really love to have a right angle drill. Fortunately, I was able to get the drill in there and be able to get a little bit of pressure on it to drill the hole as needed. But if I had a right angle drill, it would just make that a lot easier. So yeah, so I just drilled out the hole. Now I'm getting the tap ready. I've got a tap socket, and this was more difficult, I guess is the word. Well, I mean, it wasn't really hard. It just took more time than I thought it would. The tap, you know, I had to put a lot more pressure on it than I anticipated. So, yeah, I mean, we got it done. It's not like, you know, it's not even tapped there, so I got to try again. So yeah, it just took a lot more time than I was expecting to actually tap this. But once we get it started, once we get some pressure on it, it goes, it taps, and it's exactly what we want and need. And just like that, we have a hole and a place for our ground to go. And fortunately, that frame rail is already pretty cleaned up from when I was doing a lot of the work in that area, so I don't have to, you know, clean up the area anymore. So what we'll do is we will strip a bit of the cable off. We will take one of our 6-gauge 1/4-inch lugs. Of course, I use 6-gauge lugs on this 4-gauge cable. It just works out better. The 4-gauge lugs never properly tighten down. And with that very quickly crimped, we will throw the wire down in the hole. Because that hole is sharp, you know, doing my best not to really reef on it because I don't want to tear any of the cable. Now, mind you, that is the ground, so if it grounded out on the frame, it's not really going to hurt anything, but it's always best practice not to, you know, just be lackadaisical with it. Oh, puppies! We got answer in 47. And with that, I am just opening up some parts that I got in order to complete some of the intake stuff. And what else did I get here? Oh, right, I got some clutch connectors for the clutch switch, for the neutral safety switch. And from Pro Wire, we got some wire and I forget what else. Oh yeah, new crimper for the ring terminals and stuff. It's kind of their recommended for their high temp rings. So it was used, so I bought it, and it seems to work quite well so far. Yeah, so there's the 4-inch coupler, and so that 4-inch coupler is just going to go over both the air intake as well as the 4-inch piping or the tubing for the Pro Charger inlet. I am going to have to fabricate a steel ring to go on the inside of the air cleaner. That way when I clamp down, it's got something to hold on to, and it'll pinch the air cleaner coupler between the silicone coupler and that piece of steel, making it so that it stays on. Alright, so we are going to start running some ground wires in the car. One of the ground wires that I need to run is, I think this might be for the stereo. I'm just going to that ground station there, but I do need to run a couple other grounds that, now that I remember, I don't think I do them in this video, so I'll talk about them when I actually do them. Yeah, so I'm just running that over with where like the rest of the stereo wires are, so that's going to be my stereo ground. Alright, so what we're going to do now, I think, is I realized that... Oh, no, I'm going to do some grounds. So those two grounds I had run before, and I didn't put ends on them. And the reason why I hadn't put ends on them is I knew I had ordered these crimpers, so I wanted to wait until these crimpers came in to test them out, make sure they're going to work well. And they did. They worked super nice. I am so happy with how those performed. It was a lot easier to crimp those ends than using my other crimper, and it's just a more secure crimp as well, I think. Now that we're super happy with that, we can throw these grounds on this bolt. So as you can see, we're throwing the dash back in, and I'm going to, I think I'm going to start working on some of the gauge wiring. Yeah, so that is my gauge backplate, and right now it's attached to the gauges, so I'm just feeding all the wires through, and I am going to attach this backplate to the dash. I went through and I drilled the holes out in that backplate in a previous video. Now I'm just mounting it into the car. Now we got that in the car. What I'm doing is those three wires there that are in my hand are the ground, the gauge power, and the gauge illumination. So I'm just getting those cut, and I'm getting them terminated and put onto the terminal strips as needed. So here we go. Wiring is done. Everything's connected. I'm just kind of shoving everything in there. It's a lot of wiring to fit in that small little space. So I may go through and redo all of the wiring, but I haven't fully decided yet. So yeah, so there's my headlight switch. I'm just connecting the connector in the back to the headlight switch, and I'm just kind of laying the dash in place. So as at this point in time, I had a possibly great, possibly terrible idea. I said, I got the gauges in the car. I've got battery and ground run to the back of the car where the battery's going to sit. Why don't I just very haphazardly connect the ground, the chassis ground, and the fuse box power to the battery and see if the gauges work? And so that's what I'm doing. I grabbed those clips. I'm just going to, strip the ends out. I'm not putting actual ends on them. I don't need actual ends on them. I just need to be able to connect it to the battery. So yeah, that's what we're doing. It's kind of exciting. We're gonna get our first look to see if any of the work that I've done has actually been correct. Obviously, this is not the way to connect the battery to the car, but for a simple test, it works. So I put the cables on there, and then I just kind of touched the cables to see if there was any heat, and it was okay. It was fine. And I don't know if I had just turned the light on or not. But yeah, so I had turned it on, the dash lights came on, and there we are in the dark. God, those gauges look nice. The speedometer is different because I ordered it differently, so I will have to get a new one to match the rest of the gauges. But it's so exciting that at least one circuit that I wired worked correctly. I mean, it's a huge relief that it's working. Yeah, that just gets me so excited, so pumped that, I'm actually going to be able to hopefully get this going because, it worked. I don't know what else to say. All right, now that we know that it works, I can pull the dash out. So there are two wires right now that stop me from being able to pull it out. Actually, I lied. It looks like I'm going to switch the connector on the radio. I originally planned on wiring all the speaker wires right into the radio, but that plan changed because I'm going to run an amp for the speakers. So I don't need that big 12 connector. I only need a 4 connector, ground, battery, ignition, and remote for the amplifier. So I'm switching this out to a 4-pin connector. So what I'm doing now is I'm just putting the heater controls in, just kind of loosely setting it in place, putting the dash in, making sure the holes line up and, look as I expect it to. I mean, that it fits perfectly. And with the heater controls fully pushed back, it shouldn't interfere with the radio, so everything there is going to work. I mean, it's just so exciting that things are starting to come together and things are going to work like I expect it to and like I planned it. So this is me disconnecting the dash, getting that out of there, but there's still 2 wires that are connected, so I just clipped them. I'll put a connector on it. So yeah, as you can see, the dash is fully removable from the car. I can leave all the backing wiring on the dash, and that works exactly as I want it to. Just doing a little bit of testing over on the charge pipe, making sure things are going to fit. So obviously that big chunk of intake pipe is a little long because I still need the air filter to go on there, so I'll probably have to cut that down quite a bit. But just checking to make sure that that intercooler piping is going to fit, and yeah, it'll work just fine. So I'm cutting this chunk down to length, but I don't know if I'm going to use it, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So yeah, so that looks good. That's the perfect length, everything I needed. So I'm grabbing the, what is that called? It's the surge valve. And I'm pulling the bottom plate off and just, seeing if I can mount to it. And when I pull this off, the metal they sent me, I'm pretty sure it's steel because it's kind of rusty. The pipes that they all sent are a little rusty on the inside, so I'm pretty sure they're all steel. And so if that's steel, I cannot weld aluminum to it. So I need to figure out a way to connect the surge valve to the charge pipe. Yeah, so you can see there's a little bit of rust on there. It's a little bit smaller size. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is that one pipe there is going to end up being steel. So I'll have to go and pick up a chunk of 3-inch steel tubing from my local supplier. And that's what I'll use there, so that way I can mount the surge valve to the steel and weld it on as it needs to be welded. But for right now, since I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, I don't have the steel parts, I am going to kind of continue on. I dropped that piece of tubing, so it bent it, so I'm just bending it back, and I'm going to put this this end on it anyways, even though I'm not actually sure I'm going to use it. Okay, so what I'm gonna move on to now is pressure testing my intake pipe. My brother didn't believe that it was gonna hold pressure. He told me to make sure I pressure tested it, and I kind of joked and I said, well, it's gonna get pressure tested one way or another. But yeah, I should pressure test it in the shop just to make sure. So yeah, I'm just going to build a pressure tester. I'm going to take those 2 chunks of pipe. I'm going to weld a cap on either end, weld a couple of aluminum and bungs for putting my air compressor hose to it and just testing it with shop air. And yeah, I'm not really going to talk too much about this until I get into actual pressure testing. let me just say, I know how absolutely ugly that base plate is, and I don't care. This isn't going on the car. It doesn't need to look good. It just needs to, hold pressure. So I don't care so much about aesthetics for this particular application. Alright, so you see I got a little bit of air. I'm just closing up some of the air leaks, letting the air out, and that was the first time the charge pipe blew apart. And I was only at like 8 psi here, and it was loud and kind of sketchy. So that's why I did it with such a small psi at first. I didn't want to just throw it up to like 40 psi and try and figure it out from there. You know, generally when I'm doing stuff, I start small, work my way up. And the reason why this blew apart is I didn't have any end on this for the clamp to bite onto. So the silicone coupler, even though it was tight, it just literally slid apart under that little tiny bit of pressure. So I'm just cleaning up the tube, making it a little bit shorter, making it what I need, and then I will weld on one of those little rings so that so that the hose clamp and the silicone coupler have something to bite onto. Alright, so now that we have that done, we are going to spray down all of the welds and all of the connections and spray them down with soapy water. What that's going to do is the soapy water will make bubbles anywhere there's a leak. And in this case, there was a leak on this connection, so I'm just tightening it down. And apparently tightening it down while it's under pressure is not good. So as you can see, that clamp failed. Fortunately, after the pipe blew off the first time with how loud it was and kind of how explosive it was, I realized I should be wearing my face mask, because if this thing blows apart and, comes at my face, it's not going to be a fun time for anybody. So, yeah, when that clamp blew apart, I was safe. It wasn't going to take my eye out. It wasn't going to, smash me in the face. So I was very happy with that. And as far as leaks on my welds go, the only leak was actually in the pressure tester. I didn't have any leaks on the charge pipe. So I was really, really happy with that. Putting a new clamp on, and I'm tightening it down while it's not under pressure. I think what's happening is when I had, air forcing out of it, when I'm trying to tighten it down, the air already has a path, so it kind of keeps that. So it was putting a lot of resistance on that clamp, and that caused it to fail. Either that or it's just a crappy clamp. Not sure. Yeah, so just spraying and checking and, making sure there's no air bubbles. I think there might have been a couple at that end. I don't remember. No, I think I'm pretty good at this point in time. And I actually closed the valve and then check and make sure that the air isn't leaking down. I didn't have it closed for very long. But yeah, when I closed the valve, it was off for a good 30 seconds and it didn't go down at all. And at this point in time, I had the pressure up to 38 PSI or just under 40 PSI. And I was very hesitant to go near the charge pipe, just because if it blew apart, I knew it was going to be a big blow apart. It was not going to be as small as the first two that were only at like 10 PSI. And then I think the second one blew apart at like 18 or something like that. So going up to 40 PSI, I was very, very hesitant and just kind of got in and got out and hid behind the welding cart because, yeah, if it blew apart, I didn't want to be near it. But yeah, it held the 40 PSI, so I'm very happy with that, and I'm just going to put this back on the car. Alright, now that the charge pipe is pressure tested, I am going to do a bit more wiring on the car. Actually, I think I'm going to pull the dash out. That's why I'm undoing all of those nuts and terminal strips. Yeah, I kind of forgot. I can't really pull the car out, or the dash out when the headlight switch is still connected. So, whoopsie. What I really should have done is, instead of trying to get the connector off, just pull the whole switch out. It's, pretty easy. So, I remember looking for some parts, and I was off camera, and I looked for probably 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe more, and I couldn't find them. They weren't in any of the places that I expected, and then I eventually found them in one of my bins, and fortunately I found them. But what we're going to do is we are going to redo the connector for the heater motor. In order to do that, we need to start by using this Molex removal tool, and we'll pull the 2 old wires out of the connector, and then we will put ends on some new wires, put them into the connector, and then we will use a Deutsch connector to join the output of the heater module to the input wires on the heater fan. If I recall correctly, I'm using 12 gauge cable here. It's more than sufficient for this short run. Also, the original fuse that was for this fan was 20 amp. Actually, the whole system, the fuse was 20 amps, so using a Deutsch DTP connector is more than sufficient. They're rated for, I believe, 23 amps. And if the whole system is taking a 20 amp fuse, just 23 amp connector is more than good for just the fan. Although it most likely is the fan taking most of that 20 amp draw, the actual control unit, probably maybe 1 amp, I would imagine. And just like that, we have our heater fan all wired up. Alright, so moving on, I am wiring up this here ground wire. And the reason why I am throwing 2 ground wires up to where my switch panel is going to be is because I'm going to put a emergency stop button up there. So, if anything happens, I'm in a crash, or, just for any reason I need to kill the car, I can just reach up, hit the emergency stop on the panel, and then it'll kill all the power to the car. So fuel pump, alternator, absolutely everything. All power to the car dies. The battery essentially switches off. And the reason for that is, if you're in an accident, you don't want electricity in the car. What if your fuel cell ruptures or one of your fuel lines got ruptured? You don't want to be pumping fuel everywhere. That would be very bad, especially with a fuel pump as powerful as I'm running. That would that would not be very good. So emergency stop, kill the car, kill all power, and that's what we're wiring in here. These wires need to go all the way to the back of the car because that's where my battery contactors are going to be. So that's why you'll see me run these all the way to the back of the car. So I've got that wire to the back part of the car, but all the main bundle there is still really flimsy and floppy. So what I need to do is I need to kind of get that into final position before I can keep running more wires. So what I have is I bought this assorted kit of rubber insulated clamps. So I'm just going to use those to get all of the wires set in place. I am going to eventually switch these rubber clamps out. I don't like the fact that, you know, I have to screw through the floor in order to mount them. So I will be changing that up slightly when I'm finalizing everything. But for now, this is just good enough just to get us going. So yeah, I'm going to put these clamps around all of the wires all the way back just to get them into a fixed position. So what we're doing here is we're just taking a little bit of time just to kind of make these wires in this bundle look nice and just kind of flow nice and make everything more or less symmetric, and yeah, just taking a little bit of extra time just to make things look nice. So at this point, the bundling where I needed it is done. The wires are going to the back of the car, and I no longer have enough clamps that are big enough to go around this bundle. So instead, what we're going to do is we are going to just stop this for now, and we are going to move over to doing some clutch safety switch wiring. So the idea behind this switch is, in order to send power to the starter solenoid to start the car, you have to have your clutch pedal pressed all the way to the floor. Some people remove this, and I like having it there because that way you can't start the car in gear. You know, is there a possibility of me starting the car in gear? It's not likely, but the possibility exists. So, and you know, if you try and crank it over while it's in gear, the car is going to move, which you don't want. So by having this clutch switch to break the starter solenoid wire, you know, you're guaranteeing that you have to have the clutch pedal pressed in. Now, if your clutch is completely broken, any of the linkage doesn't work, you know, if there's any problems with your clutch, it's still possible to start the car while it's in gear and the clutch is engaged. But, you know, you should have a good feel of your car to know if, you know, there's a problem with it. Also, typically, when you have the clutch in, it's kind of human nature, just kind of put it in neutral and jiggle the shifter to make sure it's in neutral. So I think this is probably the best. This is the best choice. Also, if somebody who is not familiar, if I decide to let somebody drive it and they jump in and, you know, they don't have the clutch pressed in and it's in gear and they go to start it, you know, it could be a real bad situation. So best to just put in a little bit of a safety. It doesn't hurt anything. There's no reason not to, I don't think. Alright, so I run into a bit of trouble with these guys, so I put it into the connector. I think I initially put it in the wrong way, and then when I was trying to get it back out, I actually ripped the wire right out of the connector, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so I put it in the wrong way, and just didn't work that great. And then, yeah, you can see the connector sitting in the connector. The terminal is sitting in the connector, and the wire pulled out, so I'm just, you know, rechecking my crimps and trying to figure out the better way to do this. So I just recrimp and tighten it down a little bit more, and I do the end. And then I have a bit of a tough time getting this terminal in this connector and then the connector onto the actual switch. I mean, everything looks like it's going great here, but, you know, when I try to install it, it just does not push all the way in. And it's one of those things where you really don't want to force this stuff on. You want to, you know, it should go in with a little bit of force, but not an excessive amount. And you can kind of see there, I'm comparing the old connector to the new one. And on the new one, the terminals are like a 1/4 inch more protruding from the connector, which is not good. So I'm just trying to figure that out. And what I end up doing is I end up modifying the actual terminal ends so that they can kind of come back in the connector a little bit more. And then that seems to work. Well, after a bit of struggling, we get that connector in there. I'm sure it'll work. But that is all that we have for today. So, as always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.